Hi, this is Mary Wharton, and you're on the Stage Door Show with Tom and Dave.
The Stage Door Show, celebrating the independent artist. With Dave Hondel and Tom Kline.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Stage Door Show tonight. This is Dave Hondel. I got my co-host down in Florida, Tom Kline. How you doing, Tom?
I'm doing good. Good to be here.
Tonight, we're so honored to have our guest, multi-award winning filmmaker, producer, director, Mary Wharton. Mary, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Mary, your recent documentary, Jimmy Carter, Rock and Roll President, swept a lot of awards at some of the film festivals recently, and it's critically acclaimed. It was on CNN, which I couldn't wait for, and I watched it when it aired. But you got to really do this with your father, which is great. The famous blues musician Bill Wharton, and I have a daughter myself who's doing the same thing I am. So as a father, I'm very proud of that. So how was it for you to be able to work with your father on such a big project like that?
It was really, really great. And, it was a funny thing. I've never worked with my dad like this before. I've certainly licensed his music for shows that I've done in the past, but on a pretty limited scale. We actually had kind of another composer that we were talking to in the beginning of the project, and it didn't work out for various reasons, scheduling mostly. But it was a pretty well-known composer, and we were super excited to have this person on board, and then it fell apart, and I was in a little bit of I was about to use the S word, but it was a little bit of like, oh no, what are we gonna do kind of moment. And I asked my dad to send me some of his music that was pre-existing. I was just like, anything that you have, instrumental versions of your songs, send me some tracks so that we can just try to start using them. And we also had another composer who recorded some stuff on spec for us. And we were auditioning a lot of different music for the film. And one of the things that was really important was, because of Jimmy Carter being from the South, and because we were really trying to sort of upend people's notions about who Jimmy Carter is with this movie, I wanted to be careful that the music not play too much into people's preconceived expectations about him. Like if we had just hired a banjo player to play some, Americana country songs and that was the score, it would have been like, no big surprise, right? So my dad's music definitely skews towards the Americana, realm of things, but he also has a pretty wide variety of styles that he's, dabbled around in over the years. And so we started placing his tracks, and they were just magnificent. They were actually just like the first pieces of music that we placed. And then I started just kind of tiptoeing in and being like, so if I sent you a scene, like, do you think you could write something for this particular scene? And he was so excited to tackle. It's something he'd never done before, but he took on the challenge and just nailed it every time. And it was such a joy to be able to work with him, because not only was like he giving me music and I was giving him feedback and, sometimes asking him to change things, but I didn't really have to ask him to change much because he really got it, really quickly. But also because I was showing him rough cuts, he was giving me feedback on the storytelling in the film that was so valuable, because, when you're doing something, especially something like this, where it was kind of a big secret, this film. We couldn't tell people about it because we were so worried that someone else was gonna scoop us and get the story out before we could, So we had to be super secretive about it, and I couldn't show cuts to people or even tell people what I was working on half the time,
Yeah, real secret. I mean, that's competitive, correct? I mean, the industry.
Yeah, I mean, but also like we were worried that CNN would bang out a quick piece about it, and then it would be like the big surprise is out. Like that was one of the things that we had going for our film was people would be like, wait, Jimmy Carter, rock and roll, Bob Dylan, the Allman Brothers, what? Are you kidding? Like, huh? So we protected that secret. It wasn't really a secret. I always say it was sort of like a secret that was hiding in plain sight, because as soon as we started looking into it, we found all kinds of stuff. But in the beginning, I didn't know anything about it, and I was shocked to learn, as much as we learned on this project. But
I'll say I heard about it from a friend of your dad's before it actually came out, and I was I didn't say anything to anybody, but I was like, wow, Jimmy Carter, rock and roll president? I didn't expect that. But going to your dad and the growing up, like you're from a family of pepper people.
Yeah.
And you went to Florida State, which is kind of up there where your dad lived, I'm assuming where you grew up.
Yep.
And then you went to VH1, and your whole career, your whole life story has been telling the story of all these iconic musicians. You've done so many documentaries, and like at what point, how did you quickly as you can, the story of how you got to where you're at, and when you realized like doing these documentaries about music is what I'm going to be doing. I love this.
Well, it definitely was always a passion for me. I think there were moments in my youth when I harbored dreams of becoming a rock star, but apparently I don't have any musical talent. So that was, the end of that. But I've always been obsessed with movies, and I've always wanted to be a storyteller in some way. I thought about being a writer, whatever. Yeah, I guess in some ways it was just sort of like, it seemed like the best thing to do. And it's not a particularly great career path. I wouldn't advise it to people in terms of, if you want to get rich and famous, especially if you want to get, famous quickly. It's, I've been doing this for 25 years, I'm still not famous, and I'm definitely not rich, so, but it's something that I was kind of driven to. It's sort of like, the universe works in mysterious ways, and it feels like every decision that I ever made has led me to this place where, I'm lucky enough to have the privilege of being a storyteller that's able to reach a broad audience every now and then,
Well, I heard a story, Mary. No, you're talking about no musical talent, but I did hear a story, and I read it, where your father was performing on stage with the band, and you and your sister were toddlers, I believe, at the time, but wandered on stage and started playing the piano, and he said it was the greatest moment of his career. So talk about that a little bit.
I don't even remember that. That's one of those family stories that, I was too young. I do remember that I loved when I was a kid, my dad has always been a musician. He's never done anything else. And there would always be a bunch of his musician friends hanging around the house when I was a kid, and my dad has a bunch of guitars, and I loved like the inside of his guitar cases, because they're always like velvety and like bright colors, and he had this in the 70s, he had one of those Ovation guitars with the big rounded backs. And I could like get into that guitar case and like curl up. I remember one time my sister locked me inside, and I was really mad about that. But yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, my dad's music collection was a huge influence on me. I loved listening to albums. I would get into trouble for, you know, getting my fingerprints all over his records or scratching records. One time I dropped one and broke it, you know, clumsy kid hands. And I loved just kind of hanging around, you know, like I said, like I love the way guitar cases, like the way they smell, and, you know, all the instrument cases were something that were like fun. That was, you know, my playhouse as a kid.
I can see though, like I have claustrophobia. If somebody locked me in a guitar case, I would go crazy. I would claw my way out.
It's, yeah, a little bit of like a coffin.
Yeah. But over the years, I mean, you have done, like, I was stunned when you sent the bio. I'm going to read it real quick. Like Joan Baez, LL Cool J, The Doors, David Bowie, U2, Linda Perry, Train, Pitbull, Enrique Iglesias, Jimi Hendrix, George Clinton, Elton John. I mean, it's the who's who. You were part of the Bruce Springsteen making of, which one? Making
Born to
Born to Run.
Mm-hmm.
Of all of those, I mean, you've had access to talk to, and on Jimmy Carter, you had so many musicians of renown on there.
Mm-hmm.
Was there ever a moment where you found yourself face to face with somebody you idolized growing up, and have you ever had that starstruck moment?
Yeah, I mean, well, talk about, you know, shaking hands with the president is
Good point.
Yeah, but it's certainly definitely been starstruck. I mean, you know, I try to hide it as best as possible, and you know, I for a long time I would never, you know, ask for autographs or selfies or anything like that. So there are definitely some people that I've had the pleasure and honor to work with that I kick myself now, like now that David Bowie is dead, like why didn't I ask for a photo? But you know, also a lot of, especially in the early days of my career, when I first started making music documentaries and meeting a lot of rock stars when I was working at VH1, it was, you know, quite honestly in the days before smartphones. And so oftentimes there just weren't cameras around, you know, but you know, the interesting thing to me is that when you meet special people in the world, and there are a lot of those people, you can tell immediately that they are famous for a reason. You know, it's not just that they got lucky, you know. I mean, one of the people that I was the most nervous I was pretty nervous the first time we shot with President Carter, I'm not going to lie, but the most nervous I think I've ever been in my life was when we shot an interview with Aretha Franklin for my Sam Cooke film. And she is, you know, she was a commanding presence, as you might imagine, and not an especially warm and welcoming person either.
Mm-hmm.
Like she barely would even look at me, you know. and I was just like bowing down to the queen, like, you know, please don't eat me. Because yeah, but she, you know, her face just lit up when she started talking about Sam Cooke, and she became almost a different person when she went to that place to talk about him. And that was an amazing moment for me.
Have you ever interviewed somebody that you were really looking forward to interviewing, and without mentioning names, just really had a difficult time because maybe you had an expectation of that person, and then when you sat down with them, you completely changed your mind about that person after the interview? Have you ever had that situation?
I've definitely been disappointed by people, and they say oftentimes, like, you should never meet your idols. But I think with most of the musicians that I've met, who are truly, truly talented, there's something about having that much, sort of inner power that comes from being one of those special people in the world, that they're generally really amazing because they don't have anything to prove. And there's been some people that I didn't necessarily idolize, but I was like, oh, I've always liked this person or thought they were cool, and then you meet them and they're like bitter and jaded.
Sure,
and
sure.
You're just like, wow, really? Like, do you have to be mean to everyone?
Yeah. Little surprising, right?
Yeah.
I was going to ask too, of all of because like I was reading on the list of everything you've done, what was your favorite project? And I'm guessing Jimmy Carter probably, because that was so huge historically. But beyond that, or if it was Jimmy Carter, what was the most rewarding? Where you're like, I'll remember that for the rest of my life.
There's a few. Jimmy Carter is certainly ranks up there as being probably the most rewarding, because we were able to bring it out at a time when I think that America really needed to be reminded of what is good and great about our country. And I think, if I could be so immodest as to say so, I think that the film does that. I think it reminds you about, that there are people in this country who do things for the right reasons, and that we truly are we've contributed so much to the culture of the world with our music, and not just rock and roll, but American music, jazz. It's been a major contribution, and music is such a powerful source of joy and happiness and enlightenment. I think that music is the closest that we humans will ever get to touching the divine. And I think that that's one of the things that I love the most about being able to tell stories about music, is that it reminds people of that. And that's a special privilege. I will say also that another experience that I will always hold near and dear to my heart is the Sam Cooke film, because not only is it just such an incredible story, and he's such an incredible artist, legendary, groundbreaking, iconic, like all of those things, but obviously he died well before I was born. But his family welcomed me into their family, and that was an incredible experience to have. And I'll just always love his brother L.C. Cooke until the day that I die. He's like my Uncle L.C.
Well, the film, Mary, the film was amazing, by the way. My wife and I saw that film and your interview with Aretha and the Cooke family. It was a really amazing piece of work. And speaking of that, how it's like a music brings people together. It really, I mean, in your work, you would see this, but it breaks down barriers too. I mean, it breaks down racial barriers, and you know, we had a conversation the other night, my wife and I, about watching one of your films about the Jimmy Carter film, because he was singing gospel at a gospel church. And you know, I did a lot of music videos for gospel musicians, so I was
Mm.
in a lot of churches, African American churches, and just to see how music just brings everybody together, communities together, is amazing, of all races and ethnicities. It's just amazing. So I'm sure you see that a lot in your work.
Absolutely. And it's one of the things that makes me want to keep doing this. You know, it's very challenging work, to say the least. But it's rewarding because it brings joy to people, and it starts conversations, and you know, it gets people maybe out of their heads or off their phones for a minute to engage with other humans. And that's something that, you know, is sort of sorely lacking, especially now because of the pandemic. But even before that, you know, people have a tendency to, you know, get on their phones and not be, you know, present in the world. And yeah, but I do think that music has an incredible way of bringing people together, and it's a very special thing.
I saw somewhere on Facebook, I think, or somewhere, that your newest thing, because I was going to ask you, like, did you take some time after Jimmy Carter, or did you dive right into another project? And Tom Petty
Yeah.
you're wrapping that up already? Oh my God.
Yeah, it's this has been a really quick one. And I actually, I did take a little bit of time at when we finished Carter, because right when we finished and as we were about to premiere the film at the Tribeca Film Festival in 2020, the pandemic hit. And so everything came to a stop, like all at once, you know, for the entire world. And I was, you know, sitting at home wondering, you know, what I was going to do, you know, and you know, it was tough for everyone, but it was, you know, it was like I was really not sure how it was going to work again. And then this kind of archival based documentary project just kind of fell into my lap. And it was the most amazing thing, because at a time when, you know, I was kind of a little bit lost. I didn't, you know, I lived in New York City, and I left my home, and, you know, I was kind of jokingly calling myself a pandemic refugee, but I didn't know where I belonged, where I should be. You know, should I stay in the city because I want to support New York? I'm a New Yorker by, you know, by now. Or do I go away because it's not a safe place to be? And, you know, the very first wave of the pandemic hit New York really hard. And, you know, when you have like tractor trailer trucks being, you know, freezer trucks being turned into morgues outside of the hospitals, it's a pretty good sign that maybe, you know, you could do more good by getting out of the way, basically, you know. And then this Tom Petty thing came along, and I just was able to like bury myself in work with this, making this film. And it was like both the music being so uplifting. It's about Tom's record Wildflowers, which is a beautiful record, and being able to just be creative and do what I do best. It really saved me through the pandemic. Like, I would have gone crazy if I didn't have something creative to do. And so I'm super grateful on so many levels, and really excited. We're rushing to get it done now. We're doing the sound mix and the picture finishing, and it's going to premiere at South by Southwest in a couple of weeks.
Oh, we can't wait for that, Mary. You know, I always talk about this with my guests on the show, and I want to bring this up to you because I think somebody with your experience, all the years that you've done this, we talk about somebody's legacy, what they want to leave behind to the fans of their work. So what is the message you want to give to your fans? What do you want them to walk away with when it's all said and done?
Well, that's a tough question. I think ultimately, I would just say that, the reason that I've kind of focused my career on telling stories about music is because I firmly and from the bottom of my heart believe that music will bring us together, that music will help us get through the toughest times, and that it's an essential part of being a human. Every culture in the world has found a way to make music, often before we've found a way to make any other form of art, and it supersedes language, and it supersedes cultural barriers, and race and everything else. And so I think that the important thing to remember is just that music will be there for you, and we should just never let go of that. And I think we need to remember to support our musicians as much as we can. They need a lot of help right now. A lot of them are struggling. And so I think that we need to realize as a society that, art and culture and creatives are what keep us alive. And so hopefully, people will keep supporting that.
That's well said. And we can't thank you enough, Mary, for being on the show. I know Tom and I were super excited to have you join us today and give us your insights and your work. And we're both huge fans of your work, and we can't wait
Thank
to see
you.
we can't wait till the Tom Petty one comes out, because obviously we're excited to see the other ones as well. So thank you again, Mary, for joining us.
I had one real quick question. Where do people find a lot of because you've got 20 or so documentaries. Where are they at?
Well, a lot of them were for VH1, and they're not available anymore. A lot of them may have been the Joan Baez film was available on DVD and on Netflix at one time, but I'm not sure if we typically only license material for a certain period of time, and maybe the licenses have run out. But so I think that's the case with the Sam Cooke film, although you can find DVDs of it. Jimmy Carter is available on Amazon Prime and HBO Max and iTunes, wherever you typically rent video from. And trying to think of what else is out there that's really readily available. You can find the Sam Cooke DVDs every now and then on different places. So it's a mixed bag.
Well, and I'll keep looking too. I do a lot of eBay.
You might find some stuff there.
Well, thank you again, Mary, and again, good luck, best of luck to you and the film festival circuit with the Tom Petty documentary. Can't wait to see it. And again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.